Let's go ahead and get started. If you please join me in prayer. Father, thank you for this morning as we're able to be here. Pray for those that might still be on their way and for these next 40 minutes or so as we start to get ready to get into the text of Revelation. I do pray you give us wisdom and humility in all this, knowing that your church has been around for 2,000 years and there's been a lot of people with a lot of views, and just like we talked about on Wednesday, sometimes it's you wonder about what things push us too far to not be in Christ, and the things that we can be wrong about, and that there's space for that within us. So please help us have guidance so that we might understand your word as you intended for us to understand, but also to be humble in our approach. Thank you, Father. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Oh. Second error already. This is actually technically class 3. All right. So, by the way, we're the first class was on. I ended up putting on YouTube so Dan can watch it. So, if any of you ever are curious about a class that you might have missed or want to go to, let me know, and I can put that somewhere for you guys to take a look at. Not that my classes are amazing, but honestly, if I were going to Revolution for the first time, then I kind of want to stick with the class, and I'm sure I feel like I would miss 1 week. I'd miss a lot, so just let me know. All right, as I mentioned last week, we will be doing our introduction classes to Revelation. This week, we're going to be covering the 4 views on Revelation. I made these slides, when you start with your first slides, sometimes you don't go back and correct things. We're actually only going to be covering 2 of the views this week, and we'll do the other 2 next week. So there's a lot to go through when we talk about the different ways to view and interpret Revelation. And as a quick reminder, here are the introduction classes that we will be having. This week and next, we're going to be talking about the 4 views on Revelation. The week after that, we're going to talk a little bit about authorship and date. Sometimes the date matters depending which view you might take. You're like, hey, it had to happen before Jerusalem was destroyed, or as most people believe, that Revelation was written in the 90s or late 80s or something like that. We're going to talk about the genre of Revelation. I think that's going to be a really helpful class for us to understand that Revelation is an apocalypse, a style of literature, but it's a letter. It's a word of prophecy. It's an apocalypse. Like, to view it through those 3 lenses, I think will be very helpful when we approach Revelation to see the message of it. And lastly, we're going to be talking about symbols and characters. There's a lot of symbols in Revelation, in case you weren't aware of that, and also a lot of characters that can be. When we get into the text and actually go section by section, you're going to run across them. But I want to point them out to you at the beginning so that you know to look out for them, and that to be aware of them helps you kind of put them in their context. So whether we're talking about the bride and the prostitute, whether we're talking about the trumpets, whether we're talking about the lampstands, some of these symbols, John tells us, hey, the lampstand, I think he says the lampstands, those are the churches. And later on, when we see lampstand again, we can have that image in our mind already. So especially when John tells us already what some of these symbols are, we want to be aware of that as we're reading the text. As I said, we may not take just 1 week for each of these sections. Some of them might require 2, like views on Revelation. But I think it'll be good to prepare us to get into it. Trust me, I'm waiting to get into the text, but there's a lot of baggage that comes with Revelation. So let's make sure we recognize some of that. All right, 4 views of Revelation. If you look up different views on Revelation, you could really get any number of different views. Some people say there are maybe 6 views on Revelation. People say there may be 4, 3, etc. Some people think you're talking about your view on the millennium, and that's not exactly what I'm talking about. But if you're really speaking in broad terms, then you can really take the major views into 4 different categories. And again, just to be clear, let's clarify a few things before we get into this. Eschatology. Let's define it. Eschatology, taking it from one of the dictionaries, is the part of theology concerned with death, judgment, and the final destiny of the soul and of humankind. So you could also refer to it as the doctrine of the last things. I'm going to be using this word throughout the class, so just keep in mind, eschatology, last things, theology. It may sound like a big word. I always confuse it with that other word that I think is a study of education or something. But I'll try to be using this word, and maybe I'll remember it a little better. Again, clarifying, I'm going to be talking, and I want this to be clear, I'm going to be talking about the 4 views on Revelation. These are not the views on the millennium. Whether you're a premillennial, whether you're amillennial, whether you're postmillennial, we're gonna talk about those eventually. But for now, we're only talking on how to interpret ways to approach and interpret the whole book of Revelation. In fact, you could actually be premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial, and that wouldn't necessarily tie you down to any of these 4 specific views. So you could, like I know some people that are, some people I've studied, they're postmillennial, but they have this preterist leaning. I know someone that's, I've seen someone that's a, what's the word? They're actually take more of this preterist approach to Revelation, but they're not entirely sure if they would be considered, if they would go with the premillennial or amillennial view. So we'll talk about some of those instances because it can be confusing, and I've done a lot of work to try to understand the people that represent these views. But we'll get to that in a bit. I know that the millennium is a big topic, and a lot of people talk about their view of Revelation in these terms. However, the millennium is, in my estimation, not actually one of the main points of Revelation. It does matter, I will say that, and a lot of people, depending on what their view of the millennium is, their attitude can actually be fairly differently on how they approach the end times. But it's actually only talked about for half a chapter. I may have misspoke last week and said 1 verse, but really only chapter 20, the first half, talks about the millennium. So that's why I would say when you're talking about the whole book of Revelation, it's a smaller part than kind of how you view the whole book. It is in the third to last chapter, I'll give you that. So maybe there is some added weight because of that, but still, I don't think it's how you view the millennium is the biggest thing on Revelation as a whole. A few more things. I am debating whether I want to talk about the millennium in this introduction or when we get to chapter 20. I know that would be a long ways away. I will likely address it at some depth next week, just so you guys are a little clear on when people talk about the 1,000 years. I'll address it in some depth, but when we get to the text, I'll go a little bit deeper into that. So I think that's probably what I end up doing. All right, here are the 4 views. The 4 views are preterist, historicist, futurist, and idealist. And here's another thing that might be a little confusing. There can kind of be some mixing and matching between these views or approaches, and hopefully that'll be more clear at the end of this class, because especially one of these people often lump in will mix with the other views. All right, preterist, historicist, futurist, idealist. Let's start with some basic definitions, and then we'll get a little bit more detailed. Honestly, you can kind of take these 4 views or approaches, depending on whether you want to put Revelation, where you want to put Revelation in regards to time. Preterist. Here's a general definition. They would say most of Revelation took place in the first few centuries when it's talking about the fall of Jerusalem or of Rome, or both. Historicists would say Revelation tells the story of church history, notably regarding the Reformation and the papal system. So the Pope, how he fits into the book of Revelation, how Revelation talks about that. The futurist approach would say that chapters 4 to 22, essentially, they have not been fulfilled yet. They're still going to come. When Revelation is talking about this, chapters 4 to 22 are going to happen sometime in the future. Futurist view. And finally, the idealist view. The idealist approach would be hesitant to want to pinpoint the symbolism with historical events. They would say Revelation has timeless truths about good and evil, and you can kind of read it that way. And just again, I want to make this point clear. There can be a lot of variance within these definitions. So I would suggest seeing them more as approaches than, hey, these. I don't know. You could escape from there. I heard that. I know you could escape from this thing. So when I give you these definitions here, even within these definitions, some people might say that doesn't exactly fit my view. But I would say look at these 4 views, look at them more as approaches. For example, partial preterist. Preterist, by the way, meaning before, past. Take that as a definition. A partial preterist might believe that everything has already been fulfilled in the book of Revelation except for the return of Jesus. Whereas a hyper-preterist or full preterist would believe that everything has already taken place, including the return of Jesus. They would say that and we'll get into this next week more, they would say that when Jerusalem fell in the year AD 70, when the temple was destroyed and Jerusalem, completely overtaken by Rome, they would say that was Jesus coming down on judgment, and that was his coming. Obviously, there's a lot of symbolism involved there, but a hyper-preterist or a full preterist would say, yeah, even when the last chapters of Revelation, when he comes in the New Jerusalem, the kingdom is established here on earth, they would say, yeah, all of that's already happened. We're living in the New Jerusalem because Christ now reigns, now that the old way is gone away with. Whereas the partial preterist might say, we're still waiting for that great and final judgment. So with all of that in mind, let's get into the individual views here. Oh, yeah, and in case you were curious about this, next week we will talk about rapture theology, which is believed by some people that consider themselves futurists. So the idea of the rapture, you already heard me talk about last week and even before that about how the idea of the rapture, it's a very new concept. Like the idea of the rapture existing, having the idea of like someone disappears like that, is something that really, we only have documentation of that being believed around the 1830s. So barely 200 years old. I know it seems weird because you watch movies or see memes and you're like, oh yeah, clearly that's what most people end up believing. But it's only been around for 200 years. So we're going to talk about rapture theology, even though it's something that a lot of people think that most churches would even believe that that's what the Bible teaches. So it falls under futurists, so I'll speak about futurists more broadly, but I'm going to hone in on that since I know it's a big topic. All right, Historicist View. It is hard to say definitively, but you could reasonably say that some form of the Historicist View is actually the oldest view. We don't actually have any surviving commentaries on the book of Revelation from before the 200s, before the 3rd century. But some of the earlier commentaries that we see, they kind of take this approach of historicism of like, hey, God told us in the book of Revelation what the church age is going to be like, what the age that we're living in right now. Revelation, again, historicists would say Revelation tells the story of church history in advance. The most well-known version of the Historicist View usually includes the Reformation, which happened around the 1500s and the 1600s, and they would talk a lot about the Pope, about how it's like, yeah, you see all these trials, you see these plagues, you see various things, and look, there's the beast, there's the beast that comes up right in the middle of Revelation. That's the Pope coming to power, and the rest, and he's going to fall eventually, and that's kind of all bad. So if you're a reformer, if you're part of this Protestant movement that's rising up, and you're having all this criticism of the Pope, then yeah, those ideas kind of fit into what you're thinking. You're thinking God is with us, and the beast, it's the Pope that's gotten out of control here. By the way, apparently there was a Catholic school of thought that also thought the Pope might have been the Antichrist. So kind of funny how that one works. Even that was even before the time of the Reformers. But I digress. Generally speaking, historicists are viewing church history through it, but the best known version of it is the one that the Protestants would champion. And the name is an easy way to remember this view. Here's a kind of a little chart to tell you what they might think. They would say the first 3 chapters of Revelation, hey, we're talking about the first century church. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm writing this letter to Laodicea, to Philadelphia, to Sardis. Cool. And then we're saying chapters 4 through 19, where we're talking about, oh, hey, the seals, the trumpets, witness, the woman and the dragon, beast, bulls, harlot, Armageddon. All of this is happening through the church. It's in the time of the church fathers, the medieval period, the Reformation, the church age as we see it now. All of this up to the 1,000 years is happening within the church age. And then finally, the last 3 chapters where the dragon is destroyed, that's going to be the second coming, the general resurrection, the last judgment of the new heaven and new earth. So that's a little chart to kind of see where things would generally settle into. Revelation, here's some historical view, from the historicist view, here's some examples of how they would interpret Revelation 9:3. Then out of the smoke came locusts upon the earth, and the power was given to them as the scorpions of the earth have power. The appearance of the locust was like horses prepared for battle, and on their head appeared to be crowns like gold, and their faces were like human faces. Some forms of this view would say that when the city of Constantinople was falling to Islamic forces, that's what it was talking about. These locusts that came upon the earth, their appearance, like they would be on like horses ready for battle. Yeah, that's the holy city that was falling. Not holy city, but that's when Constantinople, I think at that point was a big central Christian city, obviously named after Constantine, who emperor that kind of converted to Christianity. They would and look. Let's see, where am I? Yeah, look at Revelation 9:5. And they were not permitted to kill anyone, but to torment for 5 months, and their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it stings a person. Still that same chapter we read about the locusts, but look at the 5 months part specifically. This is how one of the ways that they would interpret it. They would say, 5 months, there's 30 days in the month, 5 times 30, about 150 years. Hey, historicists would say that, historically speaking, Constantinople was under attack over a period of 150 years until it fell. And there's some reason to, you could put the numbers in such a way where, yeah, you could say Constantinople had been on and off being attacked by different forces for 150 years, and then finally it fell. Another example, Revelation 13:1. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on his horns were 10 crowns, and on his head were blasphemous names. The beast was often associated with the Pope among the Protestants. So when you see Revelation 13:5, it says, a mouse was given to him speaking arrogant words and blasphemies. Like, yeah, that's the Pope, they would say. And an authority to act for 42 months was given to him. 42 months. 42 times 30. 1,260 days. So a historicist would have seen the papacy really coming to power in the year 600 AD. Historically speaking, I believe that was Gregory the Great. So it's a 600 plus 1260 is 1860. So we could say that they would predict the fall of the papacy in 1860 AD. Okay, stands to reason. The Reformation happens in the 1500s, 1600s. A bunch of reformers, they're championing this view, and they're saying, hey, this is going to come to an end around the 1860s. This is actually, it was so popular among the Protestants that this was actually referred to as the Protestant view for a long time. It was held by Martin Luther, Matthew Henry, Isaac Newton, John Calvin, Jonathan Edwards. Like, if any of these names ring a bell, if you're familiar with any of these, then yeah, these are teachers of history that were very prominent, very influential in their times. But there is something important you should know about this view, though. Kind of important. Actually, this is a book that I really like. It's actually a really good resource and also a really great series. The series as a whole tries to have dialogue and essays from people that disagree on different things within the Bible. And one of those is on the approaches for Revelation. However, this book, while it is about 4 views on Revelation, it actually leaves out the historicist view and replaces it with 2 forms of the futurist view. The book does recognize, I read the introduction, and it does say the traditional 4 views are the ones that I've given you guys up here. But it also recognizes that the historicist view is essentially defunct. So it presents 2 forms of the futurist view instead. Why would the historicist view kind of fall out of favor? Because the Pope's still around. Like, yeah, the Pope is still around. Pope Francis today. The systems, I'm not going to say it's as powerful as ever. Used to have an army, but the Pope is still around, and there's still great influence around the world. So, the futurist view is essentially not espoused by anyone. It was widely held by Protestant interpreters after the Reformation, like we said, and even into the 20th century. So even into the 1900s, some people were still kind of holding on to it. But today, no critical New Testament scholars advocates for this view. I should say, though, it is espoused by Seventh-day Adventists, and essentially, and I'm quoting someone here, essentially self-published authors who are desirous to reintroduce this viewpoint. So there's a few people that will still write about it, and if you ever are by a Seventh Adventist church, go somewhere. Sometimes they'll do Revelation seminars. This form of the view is something that they would be teaching you in those places. Honestly, this view might have been more appealing if we had been alive a few centuries ago. Obviously, the Pope is that, and I'm pointing out that specific instance, and it was a bit of a death knell. But there's a lot of things that kind of fit well if you really try to read symbolism into it, but also a number of other reasons why it would fall out of flavor, I guess. There's actually a group called the Millerites who believed that Jesus would return on October 22nd, 1844. They sold their property, they went to the hillside, and waited for Jesus to come back. This event, you can look it up. It's called historically tagged as the Great Disappointment. You can look it up on Wikipedia, and there's an interesting article on that. Nice, easy. Hey, Wikipedia is a lot more trustworthy than when I was in high school, I'm told. So, but yeah, you can look that up. And there were actually many reactions to this event, including a number of splinter groups. A lot of people went back to their denominations before they were Millerites. Some people, I assume, probably left the church or something. And a splinter group that would become the Seventh-day Adventists came from that as well. How, Millerites didn't survive as a whole, but one group, they persevered, I guess you could say, reinterpreted and found a way to make that work. However, even though this view has passed from the scene, it still has some slight impact today. I talked about the Seventh-day Adventists, and I'm speaking from personal experience. There was a time where I was told that Revelation mentioned previous popes within it, and some future pope was represented in there as well. So even though it's not championed by anyone, you might still feel the hints. You might still feel the effects of that view today. Even just among the Seventh-day Adventists, you would get that as well. Let's see. Okay. Any questions on that? Anything worse you guys are curious about with that view? What was I gonna say? Yeah, I think there's a lot of efforts today to kind of give you some of the views that older reformers would take. If you see a Matthew Henry Study Bible, if you see Reformers Church History, but probably that one's, I'm guessing those are some of the things they might take out, their views on Revelation, since it's not really something people are looking to espouse nowadays. All right, let's talk about the Idealist view. Idealists, again, they would be hesitant to want to pinpoint the symbolism with historical events. Revelation has timeless truths about good and evil. So if the historicist view is saying that, hey, in regard to time, then we're living in the times of the book of Revelation. Like all these things are happening throughout history straight through. The idealist would say, yes, but you can't really say Revelation is telling you anything specific about history. Mostly. They would say you mostly can't say it's telling you anything about history. They would say the chapters addressing the churches are often seen as historical in this view. But otherwise, Revelation is mostly seen as a dramatic depiction of ideals and principles. There are some general ideas within the idealist approach. For example, they would say that Revelation teaches you that there is warfare between Christ and Satan. They would say that Christians, they're involved in that warfare, and they're saying that they can defeat Satan even if they are killed. As I was reading more about the idealist view, I was feeling more like they're reading Revelation as parables. Like the way Jesus uses parables to talk about, the truth of life, the way life is, the way God's way of life is. Like I was getting that kind of feeling from it as well, that the idealist view, yeah, I'm telling you a lot of these stories, a lot of these bowls, trumpets, all these things. Yeah, you're supposed to take the big picture idea for your application. So that's the idealist view would say, yeah, don't look for historical events to match these things too, but take the principle of it, see what happens, know that God is going to win, that we can defeat Satan, even if we're killed. John's telling the early church, even if your brothers and sisters are dying, you still overcome that serpent. I think most of us, if you look at these again, warfare between Christ and Satan. Christians are involved in that warfare. They can defeat Satan even if they are killed. I think most of us would agree with these lessons, just kind of generally speaking. In some ways, the idealist view can be seen as the most practical for us in the 21st century as readers of Revelation. If you want to say that there's history in there, either in the first few centuries or throughout the church age, then that's good to know, and we'll have to know all of the information in its context and know how to apply it to our lives, just like we do any other book of the Bible. But the idealist view would say, yeah, you need to be doing that from the beginning, taking these principles, these parables, these ideas, and applying it to your life, and that can be a very helpful approach. But again, for the most part, the idealist view would not want to work through the book of Revelation to find specific historical fulfillment. It is possible that some of these ideas are filled in many instances of history. Hey, look at what happened with with the Pope in this instance, and he got arrogant, all these things, and it's like they would say, yeah, Revelation doesn't tell us that exactly what's going to happen, but Revelation tells us that was inevitable because this is the way that the world works. Of course that was going to happen. Of course the human heart was going to do this. Yeah, Revelation is teaching us that this is how the world works. The kingdom of the world and the kingdom of God. That's just timeless truths, as I said. Sorry, I hate saying the word truths because I can't say the TH well, but they are timeless truths. Idealist view. So this is very similar to the historicist view, except they're going to say, yeah, it's nothing very specific, but that's the age that we live in now. So a lot of that you can just take it the same way. I will admit, I really like the idealist view. Don't get it twisted. Not because I think it's the right approach, but because reading Revelation or many other books of the Bible through this lens can be very spiritually edifying. To see the idealist view, and even no matter how it is you view Revelation, a lot of times when we read our Bibles, we still need to ask the question, how does this build me up? How does this change me today? What does this mean for how I need to live my life? And the idealist view is trying to do that all the time in reading Revelation. So I could see there being great benefit to reading a book on Revelation based on this view. Critiques. Do you guys have any critiques of the idealist view? Is there anything you're like, this doesn't quite sit right? I already told you some of the reasons that the historicist view fell out of favor. What about the idealist view?
I think that can be better answered after we study
You think that can be better what?
Answered after we studied it.
Okay, that can be better studied after we answer it more. Okay, sure. I won't. I'll keep going. I don't have to wait for an answer all day. Yeah, we'll study the book more and then have it. But I'll tell you this. If you look at certain verses, even as we've read them, even at face value, we see at the very beginning of Revelation and then at the very end where it says, "And he said to me, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near." Some people critique this view because John tells us that these are words of prophecy. Like, some of these things, it's got to tell us something about what's going to happen. And we can talk about this part of "for the time is near" as we get further into this class. But some people are like, yeah, this is a letter, and sure, the idealist recognizes the early churches and some historicity there, but this is the end of the chapter and the beginning, and all throughout we're told that there's prophecy here. Now, I do not believe that prophecy, when we read it in the Bible, only refers to future telling. I don't think that's the only way that the word prophecy or prophets are used. However, the context, at least here to me, seems to imply that this is the type of prophecy that's being done. Talking about, hey, things are coming. The time is near for these things. With that being said, I can now explain something I said earlier. I know we haven't gone into great detail about preterist or futurist, but this is one of the ways one could mix and match some of these views or approaches together. Some believe that parts of Revelation are preterist, and they would say other parts are idealist, and we need to read it in the sense of God is telling people how the world works to them. Yes, there's moments where he tells them prophecy and what's going to happen, and don't worry, Rome's going to fall, and don't worry about Jerusalem, what's going to happen there. But some people would say we do this all the time with other books of the Bible. We could read the Gospels and read certain teachings of Jesus, like the parables, and say, yeah, you need to have an idealist approach when you're looking at the parables. Jesus is teaching, again, these timeless truths. So while that's why I say these are generally talked about as the four views, but you could also see them as approaches to Revelation and how you read that. The same is or has been true for historicists and futurists, where they will take more an idealist approach. By the way, if anyone tells you that they take everything in the book of Revelation completely literally, that's just not really possible. Even John tells us that some things are symbols for other things. So some people like to use that as a defense for their view of Revelation, that we're doing things more literally, and they might be being more literal, but it doesn't mean that they're more correct, I would say. Let's see. Sorry, I'm using a lot of ums today. The idealist view may not have much weight on its own, in my view, but it is a perspective to keep in mind as we're reading through Revelation. All right, we're almost to the end. Some believe that parts of Revelation are preterist and parts are idealist. The same, I think I repeated the slide, sorry. All right, that's as much as we'll cover for today's class. Kind of finished a little bit early, but that's all right. Next week, we're going to cover the preterist and the futurist view. And again, preterist means past, futurist, obviously talking about the future. Idealist view, kind of timeless truths. Historicist view, there are things right now in history that were being taken place. So you can kind of view the four views on how you approach time in regard to Revelation. After finishing my slides, there is a good chance I will cover some of the millennium discussion in 1 week or two. Not sure. I haven't decided yet. But I know that's a big deal. So I'll at least give you some high level information for that. Also, I do have some homework for you guys though. So pay attention. Matthew 24:40. At that time, there will be 2 men in the field, and one will be taken and one will be left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one will be left. This sounds like certain theology, certain end times theology that we might have heard about in our times. But here's your homework. Within this passage here, At that time, there would be 2 men in the field. One would be taken and one would be left. 2 women grinding at the mill. One will be taken and one will be left. Who is being taken away, and where are they being taken to? If you, I would say, read the surrounding passages to kind of get the whole picture. But that's a little bit of homework to, for yourself to look at this passage specifically. All right. Any last thoughts? Anything else? Any questions? Anything worth bringing up here? If not, we are dismissed for worship. Thanks, everyone.